Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name's Morgan McClintock, and today I am joined by the wonderful Nicole Pytel. Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Morgan. Thanks for the warm welcome. Hello, everybody.
So today we're going to be talking about lead generation in a specific sector in the FinTech space. Everyone needs leads right now. The way buyers are changing their behavior, the way they're getting their information is changing rapidly. So we thought we'd dive into this so that we can give some advice on how to get it done right.
Yeah, absolutely. What are buyers doing? What's working? What's not working? What should you be doing with AI? What shouldn't you be doing with AI? We're going to cover it all today.
So we'll be joined by Bill Rice, who is the founder of the Bill Rice Strategy Group, and they are a marketing and lead gen firm for FinTechs. And I'm interested in talking to Bill a little bit about what he's seeing out there. How are buyers actually changing their behavior? How are FinTechs responding? There are more FinTechs around, so they're under a lot of competitive pressure. And just what's he seeing working in maybe cold outbound in terms of marketing and content and executive thought leadership, events. Let's chat to him a little bit about that. This is going to be a great conversation. So please join me in welcoming Bill Rice to Fired Up. Bill, great to see you. Welcome to Fired Up. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm certainly looking forward to the conversation we're going to have here.
Brilliant. Yeah, we're looking forward to it too. So, top of the show here, let's just set the scene. You're an expert in lead gen for marketing for fintech companies. Just sort of set the scene with the buyer's mentality in that fintech sector right now.
Yeah, I think we're in a really interesting sort of predicament time for fintech. So, fintech generally, and why I've always loved this space, is these organizations are innovating. Traditional financial services process, a lot of them are a combination of banks and non-bank type lenders and that sort of thing. They bring innovation, they bring technology, they're leveraging, they're thinking forward, they're trying to do things that are more efficient and that sort of thing. What I think is really interesting about now is oftentimes a lot of that innovation or adoption had to do with the user experience and the user interfaces that these SaaS level companies, software as a service, presented to the users, to the humans, whether it's consumers or internal folks inside of these financial institutions. So it was really important to make an intuitive user experience and interface. And what's happening now, and we'll probably talk more about this, within the last 18 months, all of a sudden, LLMs, AI has sort of burst on the scene. So now all of these SaaS companies, and in particular FinTechs, are kind of in this weird, now this is certainly quite a bit of time before this becomes the standard, but I think what they're needing to think about is, how do I start to remove those user interfaces and UXs and create accessibility to the large language models and the AI agents? Because more and more the buyers of fintech institutions and maybe even the consumers in the future are more interested in those systems and those softwares interfacing with their AI agents and their agentic workflows than they are the people in their organization. To kind of really open this conversation wide up, I think that's probably the most forward looking sort of thing that's going on and conversation that's happening inside of these fintechs, venture capital, and the people who are funding these sort of innovative approaches right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've always thought of fintechs as kind of pulling more legacy businesses kind of onto that cutting edge. And now they're having to adapt a little bit. And it's more their customers saying, hey, we're over here doing this. We need you to meet us where we're at. So you opened up the AI can of worms. Let's keep it going. What's going on in the fintech market right now? Are there more startups because of AI? Is it easier to launch a fintech startup because of AI? What are you seeing in the market right now?
Yeah, that's another sort of really interesting conversation that's going on right now. So, generally in the past, to enter the fintech market, it usually required a lot of fairly expensive talent because it was highly technical software engineers, a lot of software engineers to do the coding, fairly expensive technology that they were leveraging because they were on the edge of things or they were trying to turn, again, before AI, turn human processes into technology. And that was relatively expensive, took a lot of venture capital. Quite honestly, now, and some of the audience may or may not have heard of this, but kind of the hot topic right now that was introduced by one of the co founders of OpenAI is this concept of vibe coding. And it's essentially going to your coding interface, your IDE, and having a conversation with it, much like you would Chat GPT, and talking about what you want to build. And it helps you to kind of write the code. So this is really creating a lot of turmoil in the system right now. It's displacing software engineers, it's democratizing the entry of new players and relatively small organizations, maybe even less sophisticated or knowledgeable entries into this. So it's bursting a ton of founders, a ton of ideas onto the landscape, and done well, these relatively small teams can give enterprise level fintech a run for its money. So sometimes the competitor and the landscape's not as clear as it maybe once was.
Well, that's interesting because you'd think in a space like financial services, heavily regulated, that where, you know, LLMs are problematic in some instances because they're probabilistic, and that something like vibe coding would, you'd have some defense against vibe coded startups who are just sort of, making it up as they go along in some ways without the sort of discipline regulatory framework. But obviously, the established fintech companies are feeling some competitive pressure there. Is that what you're seeing?
I think that that's a defensible moat for a period of time. But we're starting to see, and quite honestly, even advocating to some degree, is that yes, compliance regulated industries, which is the place where we love to play. This is why I like fintech, because it is sort of a defensible sort of moat. You need to understand that. But I think if you think a little bit deeper and you extend that conversation a little bit more, there's a point of leverage by bringing in AI into this. You can create more consistency. And if you think of compliance as a part of the code and a part of the infrastructure, or like we've done for some of our marketing tools where we're doing content, we've actually developed a separate AI agent that is our compliance agent. So before, we'd have inconsistencies, different writers would kind of have different perspectives, more or less training. We'd try to have QC go through that. Again, that person's sort of constrained by what they know of compliance. If we have a customer that comes in from a slightly different area, maybe normally we work in lending a lot, but if we get somebody from wealth management, you get into some different three-letter agencies. And so with AI, you can actually create a more consistent application. You can potentially, and this is what our AI agent does, it actually creates a certificate that says, hey, we've done these checks and this was the result of it. And it gives it a score as a result. So you could see a future in which AI kind of enhances compliance or becomes a feature to your compliance and your regulatory perspective or approach that could be helpful. But I think you're right. In the short term, it is something that these organizations need to be wary of as they just start to sling code around. If you don't think about this and you don't have this component set into your approach, because everybody is going to go down this path, you're eventually going to develop code and products and solutions in this way. You definitely have to put compliance in the system. But I think for a time, it will be a little bit of a short-term defensible moat.
Yeah. Yeah. So companies are facing perhaps more competitive pressure. Let's talk about lead gen. And when you're working with fintechs, they're trying to sell into small, medium, and large banks. They're trying to sell into credit unions, other financial institutions. What are those go-to strategies to sort of break in there? And what are you seeing that's getting results? And maybe just sort of share with us, how has that changed over the last 12, 18 months?
Yeah. Again, I think there's some threads here that kind of pull through. I think founder-led marketing, thought leadership coming into the market. Again, whenever you have these sort of transformational times and things get dynamic and get sort of messy and hard to understand, I think executives who are making these buying decisions and committees are more active in going out to the market to look for voices and some wisdom in that. So I think founder-led marketing content around that is working again,
Mhm.
probably more effectively than ever. For a long time, there's been this sort of democratization of media. So our traditional sort of PR approaches, those outlets are more accessible, So our TV stations are now YouTube and podcast, right? And our media, our news media is our websites. And sometimes those websites are more and more fragmented. It's not just the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal that are coming into our news feed. So I think there's democratization of that. I think executives and buyers and ICPs are looking for voices that are influential and seem to be voices of reason in those channels. And then the other sort of component of that, I think LinkedIn is obvious at the forefront of
Yeah.
that. Sort of there was a perfect timing where LinkedIn started to sort of think more about content and think more about sort of innovating the platform and not just being, a graveyard for resumes. At the same time that I think executives were kind of getting more and more comfortable using these channels, and then the introduction of LLMs. So where executives before might use a chief of staff or somebody to go through, do research, process through things, distill it down and brief. We have tools like I actually use one of my own and have a newsletter that essentially does an executive brief like that. But I find myself more and more going to Perplexity or Manus,
Mhm.
setting it up with a set of prompts of things that I want to be aware of. And then it gives me an executive brief, right? And so I think LLMs being able to do more complex research and then processing of that into an executive
Mhm.
level summary. I think, again, all of that type of content that you're pushing out there's more of an opportunity of it ending up in front of a buyer and executive than ever before without as many processes or gatekeepers in between you and that direct buyer.
Yeah, the founder led stuff is really interesting. I think we're all seeing that across LinkedIn. And I think part of that is AI. People want to hear from people, they want some authenticity, they want an actual expert to really bring them that information. What else are you seeing in terms of buyer behavior when it comes to AI? Are you seeing more and more fintechs trying to do a generative engine optimization strategy? Like, what are you seeing in terms of buyer behavior on how they're using AI and maybe how the fintechs are or should be responding to it?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I think most are doing it poorly right now. It's kind of the classic, whenever there's a new technology, I've still got a daughter in college and she started getting introduced to ChatGPT. The thing I said right off the bat is like, you always get into trouble if you take something and you try to get it to do your homework. Augment yourself, have it be a part of your workflow, be able to kind of do things more efficiently. But if you just sort of go into AI and say, I want you to do this thing. You give it no context. You don't train it. You don't teach it. You're always going to get garbage. So I think that's a lot of the application right
Yeah.
now. People are slapping chatbots on their websites again and just hooking them up to an LLM, whereby the LLM doesn't have context to your own product. It probably didn't take the time to train it. So it doesn't know about your product. This is where compliance and regulatory things can get you in trouble. It says things that aren't appropriate. So I think right now there's a general tendency for people to say, I need, and this always happens, I'm late to the game. I need to do something. So they just start slapping AI on everything. You've probably seen this in some of the SaaS tools you've seen. It's like, oh, well, I have a CRM system, so I'll just have it write emails for me and we'll slap it in and say we have AI, right? So I think, again, what's happening right now, people are doing a lot of exploration. They're doing a lot of messy stuff, which it's kind of part of the journey, but I think the ones who are winning are kind of stepping back more intentionally, thinking first about the problem sets that they're trying to solve, and then potentially seeing if AI is a solution instead of just slapping AI into every problem.
Right. And are you seeing the fintechs you're working with thinking that buyers are using AI as part of their search a lot more? Hey, I'm looking for a loan origination system. I'm looking for a new deposits, system, mobile deposit system. the buyers are leaning into, okay, well, they are literally putting it into Perplexity and ChatGPT. And so if you don't show up, if you're as a fintech, you're invisible at that point, at that top of the funnel. Are fintechs jumping into that GEO, generative engine optimization, early? Are they responding quickly? How are they responding to the way that buyers are using AI in their buying journey?
As a marketing agency, you nailed it. That's the first and most common request that we get is like, how do I show up in the LLMs? And for us, it's an interesting problem set, right? For years, we've dealt with Google search, in essence, a black box. And we kind of dealt with that and, SEOs behind the scenes sort of communicating and sharing secrets and insights that they get as feedback. And now we have sort of this new black box, which is it's offsetting Google a little bit. Google's sort of rallying and they're doing some things that are hurting us on the SEO front, sort of the zero click inquiry and those sorts of things, zero click search. And then we don't really know how LLMs. I know anecdotally, and again, we kind of use the same processes for SEO. And right now, it seems like good SEO principles are still kind of the most effective because LLMs are looking for structured data. They're trying to figure out how to respond to these unstructured requests and those sorts of things. So I think that's working. Certainly everybody wants that. The challenge, for us, quite honestly, is like the predictability of that. We're kind of familiar with that because that is a little bit of what SEO is. There's discussions of like, will there be a PPC model introduced into this and those sorts of things. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. Certainly everybody wants that. And I think it's appropriate because, again, executives, I think, and buyers are getting really comfortable with sort of the nuance that they can get back when they ask it questions versus what they used to be able to get when they would do a Google search and have to dig through a bunch of junk and a bunch of things that marketers
Yeah.
and everything that we put in front of them that may not be exactly what they're looking for. And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting time. It's certainly the largest use case for marketing agencies right now.
So when it comes to fintechs using AI, you kind of brought up some of the things that they shouldn't be doing. What are some of the best use cases that you're seeing in fintech's use of AI, especially when it comes to getting that brand awareness, getting those leads, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I could be talking my book a little bit, but I think, ahead of kind of what they're doing inside of their organization is really being able to ramp up their marketing effort because it's hard for not only founders, but sometimes we're talking about large organizations where we have a whole suite of executives that have a really interesting voice. So we can use AI to help to kind of amplify and get them out into the market to help with that lead generation. And one of the ways that we do it, I think a lot of times founder led, that makes sense. Most founders are eager and excited about telling their story. But when we get into that executive suite, a lot of times there's a level of maturity or abstraction that they have in their career where they're less comfortable sort of throwing themselves out into the public domain. And so what we're trying to do there is we're using AI, like I kind of mentioned before, to bring in that chief of staff style information to them so that they can kind of look through, suggest topics and things that they might be interested in speaking into or being a part of the conversation. It seems to get them a little bit excited. And then we
Yeah.
can start slowly, right? We can do white papers, we can do a written, and then hopefully we can lead them into maybe doing some video and things like that. So I think that's a great place to start. It also gets those folks really familiar with what LLMs are, what they're capable of, how they work, what does an AI agent do? And then I think from there, we love to kind of get into their business as well. Then we can introduce them to, hey, AI agents might be able to, this isn't our sort of purview, but could help you on the compliance end. It could help you sort of accelerate your comfort level or giving your regulators a comfort level with what you're doing on the innovative side. It could introduce you to what I think is the biggest thing that's going to hit them, how to remove those user interfaces, create this new thing called an MCP, which is essentially opening up the API and making it really easy to interact with the LLMs and share between AI agents. And so I think again, through the lens of marketing, not trying to overtalk what we do, but I think that's an easy way to start familiarizing yourself with the landscape so that you can do much more interesting technology things within and deeper in the organization.
So I agree with you. Companies leaning into sort of GEO to be visible in sort of AI search. I think that's the game, and it is a sort of an extension of SEO in many ways. But that's some different tactics which are emerging. But I think overall, it sort of speaks to the importance of building a brand. Yeah, sure, you can, in AI search, you need to be present, but building a brand overall, it seems to be more important. Conversions, people are on lead forms, etc., have been going down for a long time. People are sort of, you said marketers ruin everything, people are getting a bit frustrated with the phone calls and the follow-up after they convert. So I feel like brand awareness and building the brand is more important than ever. Do you agree with that? As you're talking to fintechs, how do you balance between emphasis on building the brand and demand gen, getting the leads, which ultimately is a very measurable metric for sales teams and businesses in general?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. Having a brand and working on that and brand building makes everything else that you need to do for demand gen easier. So, for instance, if you can get those executives to be a part of building that brand and being that voice out there, you have the good scaffolding for your brand, right? It's identifiable. You've done the right things with your visuals, the consistency in the application of the brand, and that sort of things. That builds up the sacred multiple impressions in the market's mindset before you do the necessary things that are required to get a signature on an agreement. AI will probably make it more productive, but we're still sending out emails. And if you have a salesperson that sends out an email and it comes into your box and it's a familiar brand, you have a whole different perception of that conversation than you do if it's just some random person with a Gmail account and a bunch of numbers in their username. So it's essential for sure. And again, like I said, I think one of the things people don't think about the way they should in brands is if you do have a brand, you're getting pre-impressions before you start the demand generation process, before you start doing the PPC, before you try to do the SEO and the content and all that stuff. If somebody looks at the content and they see a familiar brand, you've already overcome a large portion of the trust and the credibility that you need or you would have to sort of build up as they read a 1,000-word article. It's already there. And then from there, they're listening and it accelerates sort of everything. I think the other things that LLMs have introduced as well is because they're a little bit smarter than search engines. So this is where brand becomes a factor as well. So where you've consistently put out that brand and positioning into your messaging across social media. LLMs are much better at grabbing social media as well as sort of traditional web pages and blog posts, which we use in SEO. So I'm seeing in the LLMs a lot of times brands or people who have done a good job in positioning themselves and being clear about their value proposition and what they offer, leapfrogging. So if you look at the LLM query versus the Google search query, you can see it's much harder to game the LLM, at least today, than it is the SEO Google search results. And so you're seeing sort of a different list of top 10 here on LLMs that's more accurate than what you're seeing maybe in a Google search for a very competitive marketplace. Obviously, this is a little bit different depending on how competitive that marketplace is. But if it's competitive, you can guarantee the Google search is manipulated, whereas the LLM, particularly if you have a good brand and that positioning is clear, it's much harder to manipulate the LLMs.
Yeah, I totally agree. Brand is the precursor to everything. And sometimes startups get so caught up in we need leads, we need closed won deals, we need all this that they kind of forget about that. They tend to overlook it. But, I like your take on no, it really is like a precursor. It's the impressions before you're going to get the click kind of thing. And also, for the LLMs, because it's not anymore, just you talking about your brand and somebody landing on your website. It's how AI is summarizing what your brand is and what it stands for and what makes you valuable. So, yeah, totally agree on that point. So, let's shift to another facet of lead gen. There's so much talk about intent signals. What's your take on integrating intent data into your lead gen activities?
This is where I probably have a little bit of a contrarian take. I'm a little bit skeptical about intent signals as they're kind of being put into the market today. And I'll sort of go a little bit deeper on this. The way it's sort of being sold, at least where I'm seeing it, intent signals, is in essence, we're building a product around taking consumer behavior or user behavior, and then we're monetizing that. Although the regulatory environment is much more sort of business friendly than it's ever been, and it's getting more so,
Mhm.
on this particular point, I don't think they're taking that approach. And I think the best proxy to that, being in the mortgage industry, the credit bureaus have had a gravy train on trigger leads. Probably all of us have been
Mm.
affected by it. The moment you do anything, your credit gets pulled, they monetize that intent signals to 5 or 6 other lenders in that space. And then the consumer gets overwhelmed for that. So I think ultimately, the way, at least that I've seen it in the marketplace, I think the regulators are going to take a close eye on that. And I don't think it's going to be received well. I don't think consumers long term will sort of appreciate that. Having said that, I think the concept of intent signals is very important for organizations. And what I sort of advocate is, in essence, first party intent signals. So generating intent signals. This can be with content, this could be outbound, and trying to have a good, persistent conversation, re engaging, remarketing folks who have shown interest in your product and, in essence, have consented to that re engagement. I think that's great. I think AI will also do a great job at taking those intentions as they see it and being more connected across all of the channels that you're marketing in. So I love first party intent signals, but the way I'm seeing it monetized in some other ways feels like in the best case, the regulators would be a little bit sensitive. In the worst case, it'll just become sort of like a nasty little product, much like trigger leads have been with the credit bureaus. So that's my
Yeah.
that.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, look, at every instance, people give up their privacy, any opportunity for any kind of reward. But I do think if you're a marketer, or you should be sending your message at the right time. The buyer is ready, and if you can gather that information, because hey, these guys are looking to hire in this position.
Yeah.
Maybe that shows that they have an initiative coming in this area. That could be good for us, right? So there's other sort of public data that you might be able to use and that you can then send in your issue. But I totally agree with you. The sort of ick factor of, hey, I just did this and I'm hoping this wasn't in the public domain, but particularly when you're buying a house or something.
Yeah. Well, and maybe just to be more specific and clear, like what I'm seeing in the market is, in essence, someone, like, let's say you're an insurance agent
Mm.
or you're a mortgage broker, and you're buying from someone who has built a bunch of websites
Ah,
that are about mortgage or insurance. And the moment somebody visits that website, they connect that data to some past consensual data, and then they sell it to an insurance agent or 10, and they just blow up your phone unexpected. So that's the kind of thing. And I'm sure there's better applications of that on
yeah,
the market, but
that's fair.
that's, at least in my industry, that's the type of thing I'm seeing. For my viewpoint, I think it's a recreation of trigger leads, which I've never thought was a good consumer experience.
I think that's fair. And, I think brands are going to be very careful about, the way that they use them, because it can seem very off-put, and particularly with something like insurance. So just talk to us a little bit about cold outreach, right? What is working here?
Yeah, so it goes back to some of the other discussions we've had. I think, like you mentioned, if you have a brand, and most importantly, and this is what I've tried to really advocate with my clients, is if we can get the whole executive suite to be a part of that thought leadership, that brand building, that's the first layer. And then
Hmm.
hopefully you're creating sort of broad awareness of what you're doing and the solutions that you provide. And then from there, some of the more traditional cold outreach approaches still seem to work well. So the kind of the 1-2 punch that we see a lot, and we don't do a lot on the cold outreach, but we work
Hmm.
with some partners that do this well, is the LinkedIn connection request. And I should be
Yeah.
clear on what that looks like, because we have a lot of that stuff that we don't like in our inbox. But actually the best ones are very transparent. Say, hey, I'm here to connect with you because I have a solution. So instead of I just want to be friends and then the ambush, it's very transparent. Hey, I have something. I think you might be interested. We serve people like you. I'd love to connect if this is interesting. And then kind of the parallel effort with email is usually pretty
Mm.
effective in there. Again, still a thing of scale, but quite honestly, especially if you've done that first layer well, that's really effective because you get two things on that campaign. One, if you've done a good job, they're somewhat aware of the solution. So if it fits, it
Mm.
fits, and you're off to the races. And then I kind of think the second component of that, sort of solutions piece is that there's some FOMO, right? So if you've done a good job with that first layer, you've put into the market this sense of there's an urgency or demand for my product, at least in the spaces that I work in, lending, insurance, financial service, that sort of thing. Our industries are classically susceptible to FOMO. They never want to be last to the new thing. And so if you've done a good job on that brand awareness side, that can accelerate you into a good conversation too. But yeah, some of the old stuff is probably still working.
I'm so glad you brought up those LinkedIn messages where they're just honest and open with you because I appreciate those so much more than somebody who's like, hey, you're great. Like, I've seen all this work you've done. Firebrand's amazing. Let's be friends. And you're like, all right. And then they're like, let me sell something to you. And it's like, geez. So, no, I get to anecdotally for me, like, I appreciate those. And I can see where people would appreciate kind of that openness and honesty as well. So, another tactic I wanted to bring up is events. They are back. So glad for that. How can startups get the most out of them?
I love events, and I'll talk from a personal standpoint, but also what we advocate with clients is really there's two important facets that I think make events effective and high ROI. One, you get one of your executives on the stage. So that's the best filter, right? You draw in the audience that's interested. They hear what you're talking about. There's a great filter there, and it brings in your ICP and whittles that down to some good conversations, either, immediately following that presentation throughout the rest of the event and then subsequent. And then the second point is everything is done pre-show. So an
Mm.
effective pre-show strategy to book your schedule as much as you want it to be booked before the show starts, I think is the only way to do it because the person who wants to chat you up at the bar or at the networking event is probably not your ICP because your ICP has done the same thing. They want to be very efficient with their time. Their time is valuable, particularly at events where they're going to have lots of people coming at them. So they're already in a pre-scheduled meeting somewhere else. They're not hanging out at the networking event. Those are fun. Those are great to reconnect. I'm also a big fan, this I guess is maybe a 2A. I'm a big fan of having scheduled dinners where you bring in
Mm.
a combination of clients and prospects. Again, getting sort of that energy in the room of like, hey, we've used this solution and we're really excited about it, and we've been a good customer. And oh, by the way, we're kind of investigating the solution, and essentially your clients become a nice intimate room of sales. So that's another strategy that I like. But again, I think all of your ROI happens before the event. So many people hop on the plane and then hit the hallways and hope for happenstance. And that's a quick way to blow $3,000 plus travel.
Yeah, I agree with that, And then also the follow-up has to be fast and detailed. You have to find those leads real quick and make sure you get in front of them because, you are, and so are all your competitors. We've all had the same badge swipes, right, at events. And so, the follow-up is also, you're gonna nail that too.
I'll give it one more thing. I think this is another real key thing where AI is going to probably help a lot. I know in conversations that I have, when you're at events and you hit all these people, trying to have a personalized follow-up is real difficult because conversations get blended. So again, consensually using something like Plaid or some sort of recording device in those conversations and meetings can help you be a lot more personal in that follow-up. So I would advocate
Okay.
that because you have AI go at those transcripts. And even I find when I do that, it's amazing how many things I didn't remember or hear in the conversation that the transcript and the AI picked up. It's important. So,
What was that tool? Did you say Plaid?
yeah, I think it's called Plaid. It's like a little credit card size AI device, and it creates a transcript. I mean, I usually am as open as just I use one called Granola, which I use on my phone, and I just set the phone down there and it's like, hey, I'm gonna, my memory's not great, so I'm gonna go ahead and transcript, and nobody ever has an issue with that. So
No, not at all. We're all so used to it being recorded. Whilst we're on the topic of new tools, so yeah, Granola, I think, is a great one for taking notes, and particularly people who are not, you're trying to be in the meeting rather than sort of typing out the notes. What other new tools have you got your eye on when it comes to lead gen these days?
Yeah, this is again probably now I've always been probably a little bit of a frustrated software engineer. So I've been fascinated by how LLMs have democratized the ability to create tools. Probably my favorite new tool is Cursor, which is an AI driven IDE, and really developing some of the tools I wish I had had. So I think Cursor, using the LLMs for sure, Perplexity for a ton of research. Manus is great for doing research and actually producing presentations and producing prototyped first things. And then, of course, all the typical Claude and Chat GPT. Transcripts for everything. We mentioned, I think Mark Andreessen said this first. And so I say it all the time. There should always be an LLM in the room, even with my team. When we have a conversation, there should always be an LLM, should always be a transcript, because we are doing so much more for those sorts of things. So those are probably the key ones, is just diving in on all of this sort of stuff and starting to build some things that I wish I had before.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're more than halfway through the year, amazingly. I know our startup marketing friends out there can never have too many leads. And I feel like now that we're in Q3, maybe some of the pressure's starting to build a little bit. So what other advice do you have for startups that really need a lead gen boost?
Yeah, I think again, sometimes on the lead generation front, we sort of overcomplicate things as well. So there's all the traditional channels. I don't think marketing changes that much from how it actually works. The mediums and the tools that we use to make that happen change. But at the end of the day, we've talked a little bit about brand and messaging. You got to figure out what that positioning is. You got to put it out there as an offer in the market in some way. It can be through Google ads, Facebook ads. It can be through SEO. It can be through email direct. It could be through LinkedIn and social media and those sorts of things. And then ultimately, you're hoping to do it in a compelling way that you get a response. You've done a good job at making it easy for that capture to happen. And then you mentioned follow up before, such super critical is like when it comes in, you have some urgent response. So I think if you're struggling with lead generation, is really looking through that process. Like, what is your message? Is it getting out into the marketplace where your ICPs are? Do you have an effective and easy way to capture that? And then when you do capture it, are you proactively in a personalized way showing them that you're highly responsive, which is what everybody wants from a partner? I think I would walk through that. And then depending on your scale, even large scale, I think this works at the executive level. One of the things that I've always found effective, and a couple pretty sizable dips I've had in my business and entrepreneurial journey, and I always tell the same one because I always did. I don't know why, but it always involved 12 emails. I'd go in my contact database, I'd pull out 12 people, and I would send them an email telling them, hey, this is what I'm doing right now. And, I'd love for you to connect me with anybody, or potentially if you kind of want to see more. I'm always surprised. I always get at least 2 or 3 deals out of that. We're just inherently self-interested, and so even your closest contacts and friends, you'll be surprised how of them have no idea what you do, right? Or if you've done a little bit of a pivot, they remember you in an old context. So I can't tell you how many of those 12 people come back and say, oh yeah, like we should talk, or hey, Bob and Susie are who you need to talk to. So I always get a deal out of that. If you're in that third quarter and you're desperate, pull 12. Seems like a magic number. Send some emails, and I guarantee you'll probably get a sustaining deal out of that.
That's brilliant advice. I do think it's a challenge for companies as they extend their offering to reframe with existing customers who have got you in one bucket. Oh, okay, I'm still there, but I've extended my proposition. So I think that's amazing advice. And so Bill Rice is the founder of the Bill Rice Strategy Group, which is a B2B marketing firm for FinTech companies. Bill, listen, thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed that. Appreciate you sharing all of your insights there. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Yeah, so BillRiceStrategy.com is a great place to kind of see what I'm up to and doing. Very active on LinkedIn and easy to find. I was early there, so Bill Rice is kind of my handle there. And then the other place, and this is one of those things that's kind of shaping and reshaping, is I always wanted that sort of a executive chief of staff that I didn't have. So I created a newsletter some time ago called myexecutivebrief.com. And so that's a great way to kind of take a look at what I'm looking at and what I think is an emerging trend. And I'm on the other end of that. So if you reply to that, you'll be talking to me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So please do go and check that out. Thanks, Bill. Really appreciate your time. Thanks to you all for listening. We will see you all again next week.